Perfect. Let's start now. Let's go to the second part, power dynamics. So actually, it's not I didn't record it in sequence as I said in the last class. This is the next day. I'm recording it the next day. Maybe I turned off the fan. Yeah, better. So let's go. Let's continue. I said we were gonna continue with good and evil. What is good, what is evil, how it influences power, what role plays in power. So to start understanding it, I feel like moving now, today. What is good, what is evil, right? You try to use intuition and personal experience. When something benefits you, you usually say good. When something doesn't benefit you, you usually say bad, evil. So think about this African guy. Have you seen the video of I'm against corruption? I don't like corruption. Corruption is bad. But when corruption is only bad when I am not involved. If I am involved, I defend it. I think you know the video. That's a perfect definition of how humans understand, feel, experience, think about good and evil. Oh my god, this is very dry. And basically, it's just like that. It's when something is good towards us, or when something is bad towards us, we use those labels because good and evil are nothing but adjectives, labels that we use on nouns, on objects, on stuff. Now, you should have noticed, if you have been alive for a few years, actually, very young children realize this. Maybe, I think it was around the age of 4 or something. There is like this book over here. This book over here is very nice of how children develop cognition. Has some interesting facts. And one of the facts, I assume the one who wrote this is saying the truth, which is like at a very young age, children are capable of discerning that something that they like might be something that other people do not like. And I think it was at the age of 4 or something like that. I don't know. I still didn't finish the book. I'm like 75%. It's a nice book. Let's leave it there. So the thing is, lots of people since a very young age, we develop the capability and of understanding that what we might like, what we might perceive as good, someone else might perceive it as bad, evil. So this is just the human capability we have. It's here. So it's not like an objective thing, right? When we use the adjectives good and evil, good and evil, it's not an objective reality, but a perception of it. It's something that we perceive. So how can we define a terminology for good and evil, which is something subjective and it depends, in an objective way? How can we have a common definition? And the answer is by including the acknowledging the subjectivity of the terminology inside the objective definition. So what is the definition of good and evil? Maybe I can turn the light a bit. Yes, maybe it's better this way. So good and evil. Now, okay, before creating the full definition, we analyze, thinking like an engineer. As I saw, you observe reality, you imagine, you analyze, you think. Okay, we are using the same process, just as we did in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, class 1, class 2, class 3. So we see that what is good for me might be evil for someone else. We see that it's a perception. From this, we deduce that it's a perception. We also see, that's what I've been explaining, basically. with the corruption example, with the babies, everyone has the capability. So what are the factors that determine if something is positive for us or negative for us? As we saw in the first class, humans try to survive and to be happy. So our perception will be biased by our biological goals, which is just the tendency, right? It doesn't mean that science is truth. Yeah, it doesn't mean that science is something that is 100% truth. We're getting close to metaphysics now, but in tendency terms, well, we see that over and over again. What humans try to do is survive and be happy. So it depends on what makes us survive and what makes us happy. We will label it good or evil. If it improves our survival, if it helps in our happiness, we use this adjective. If it does not help in our survival, or it doesn't help in our happiness, we use this adjective, right? Like, oh my God, you're so evil, you're so bad, you know? Like when someone does something like, oh, I don't know, you didn't share the food with me, what an evil person. Because maybe you're hungry and then you're appealing to the survival part of your goals, or maybe you just wanted a tasty meal and you're appealing to the happiness part of your goals. But we saw that it's dependent on human nature because we are just humans and human nature is to survive and be happy. We saw that it's a perception because it can vary from the observer and perceive. And we also see that I'm missing something. Okay, yeah, I know that it's not something that has an individualistic nature. Because we're humans, we live with people, so we have individual good and collective good. It's not the same. It's different. Like you have your individual things, like yeah, I think this is good, this is bad, whatever. But if you both agree that this is good and this is bad, then this becomes a collective existence or a deeper, like a more complete or statistically speaking reality, right? Because we live with people. So because we live with people, we don't only have this more static perception, which is actually dynamic because it varies on you. It varies on if you are surviving correctly, if you're being happy correctly, if your sources of happiness changed. So it's like it has like a very individualistic and dynamic part, and also it has more. I mean, societies and cultures, what cultures consider good and cultures consider evil, it also changes through time, but it's slower because not only you need for you to consider it that way, but because if at a collective level, you need at least a majority to consider it good or consider it evil. So it becomes good and evil. And guess what? I'm gonna make a spoiler. This is how it relates to power. That's how you eventually create laws. Right? Law would be like this collective measurement of what is good and what is evil from everyone's opinions in a democracy. In a democracy, if you have a dictatorship, the collective would be the collective belief of the group that has a dictatorship. If you have an oligarchy, the collective belief of the different groups that have access to power. So like you might say, is this avoidable? Like, and I think not. Why? Because this, if you think about it, this is very, very similar. It should feel very similar to the fixed variable resolution technique. Like in our individual nature, when we process information, as we saw, we create some definitions, we fix some variables, and then we vary the other ones in search for adaptation to reality, survival, happiness, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of makes sense that if one single human behaves like this, the emergent phenomena of multiple humans has a similar structure. A law, which would be the fixed variable, that is not really fixed because with time you eventually break your beliefs and they become variable, but maybe because you don't have the capability of processing all information, you create another beliefs. Well, laws is the same. A law can be created then then there's things that are not regulated by law that vary. People die, people are born, different people have different goals, different sources of happiness. Usually the sources of survival are pretty shared, right? Food, water, security. But happiness is really subjective, and it depends on our biology, on our context, on our nature, on our individual nature, and on our collective nature, and also so our collective nature, which we can call our culture, and also our nature, not really just us, but also the literal nature, like the trees. If we have a river close by, like that also will affect what we perceive as good and what we perceive as evil. Imagine we live in a field where planting tomatoes, I don't know if tomatoes grow in a plant, but imagine this is the tree of tomatoes. And you get a tomato, and it's very fertile, and it's very this soil we have is very fertile for tomatoes. So one day we decided, with our collective or individually, we decided to plant tomatoes in our soil, our part, which is part of our, say, physical nature, right? And well, it was good. We had a lot of tomatoes. We ate, and then we have a Spanish party which was created because there was a very good harvest of tomatoes, and they were like, what do we do with the leftovers? Oh, let's do a party. Let's throw tomatoes at each other. And it became a tradition. That's La Tomatina. So every year in one date, in one city or town of Spain, I don't know if it's a small village. No, I think it's a town. They throw tomatoes at each other as a party because of this reason. It was like, oh, good tomatoes. But imagine, this is just an anecdote. Imagine that one year you were like, I'm going to plant pepper, right? But maybe pepper is not good for this soil, and it doesn't grow much. And that year, you are a bit hungry sometimes, or you are like, oh shit, the tomato party was so good, there's no pepper party. So what will our brain think? Oh, tomatoes are good, as I said. Pepper is bad. That's an example of how the nature can influence our perception of good and bad. Now, there's also the collective nature that you cannot deny, because even if you are the only one who enjoyed the tomato party and everyone just likes a lot of pepper, well, then pepper collectively will become good and tomatoes will become bad. So we cannot deny the natural influence on what we perceive as good or bad, and we can also deny the cultural influence, which is just the collective weight and agreement of what are sources of happiness, what are things we like. Assuming survival is statistically granted, of course. So I hope this gives you a better understanding on what could be the definition of good and evil and why it matters. Why it matters, because it's a static, dynamic way we process our information with our brain. In a single individual, it translates as an emergent phenomena with similar structure but probably different mechanics or different rates of change. Emerges when we coordinate societies and we create law and the ability to change law, because law with time changes, right? That's just a fact. And this is the reason, the way I make sense of it. I don't know if this is a truth or not, but for me it makes sense, and this is how I think about the world. Again, cheerfulism. Okay, I'm trying to be happy, I'm trying to survive, I'm trying to maximize my intelligence, I'm using the engineer's way of thinking to observe reality, create scenarios that are objectively true. This is just true. If you plant tomatoes and you can make a party with tomatoes and everyone enjoys the party with tomatoes, that becomes good. Everyone feels this way all the time. So this is like an undeniable reality I've observed, and then I've derived the definition from different observations, like the perception, like the tomato party, and all this stuff. So these are just, remember, my conclusions, being cheerful, which I might be wrong. As I said, we fix, then we vary, we observe, and if there's a reality that defies our definition, we should adapt it if you want to better adapt to reality and last in time, as a species, as an individual, as everything. So we can see we already have all the elements actually to create a pretty complete definition of good and evil. So what is good and what is evil? They are labels, okay? That's the definition. They are labels. Let's use this one. They are labels that we use on nouns which we perceive as they increase our likelihood of survival and later happiness. And if they increase, we perceive, doesn't mean it increases it, it means we perceive as it increases it. Let's clarify that now. But if we perceive it increases the likelihood, we call it good. And if we perceive that it decreases the likelihood, we call it bad or evil. Okay? And why perception? Because here comes a very important concept, addictions. Addictions. How would you understand addiction? Addictions are pretty much a dependent thing, right? Because when does something usually become an addiction? When do we call something addictive? When it hurts you more than it profits you. For example, cocaine. You create a lot of cocaine. Oh, so happy, so energetic. But then your health goes like brrr, and then you become very skinny, and then you start stealing money, and then you are very aggressive to some people. So the negative sum of taking cocaine is smaller than the positive things that brings you. And when that person is not capable of realizing this, even if it's clearly damaging his health, which is clearly threatening their survival, and later his happiness, because he might be happy in this moment, but then he has this amount of time where he's unhappy. But if he's not capable of perceiving it as such, he will say cocaine is good. But and that is when we call him addicted. Not only with cocaine, that's just the clearest example. Anything can actually be addiction. Anything that can cause happiness can eventually become an addiction. Some addictions are easier to fall into, some addictions are harder to fall into. But addiction is just an important terminology we can use to define the spectrum, to clearly navigate our spectrum of the things we should do and the things we shouldn't do, the good and evil. So it's important to realize. And thinking like an engineer is good because it trains your brain to think outside the box, to modularize, to analyze, to think on bigger systems and break it down. So if you are like an engineer, maybe at least you will have the tool. It doesn't mean you're going to use the tool. Remember from the previous chapter, capability doesn't mean that you're going to do it. But at least you have the tool. You know what I mean? Like, if you're fighting a bear and you have a knife, it's better than if you have nothing. But the bear is very big, so it really depends. That's why I always say truth. The only synonym of truth is depends. Because you have to analyze the context, be intelligent, and adapt. And addiction is something, well, by definition, bad. Because, well, more negative things than positive things. But if you perceive it as good because you're addicted, for you it will be good. But for people watching you, it's like, no man, it's bad. And here's another proof that good and evil are not always objective. They are more a perception. Now you might say, when we are talking about survival, good and evil are kind of objective because we all need the same. Like when you're being happy, it's different. Imagine you take cocaine, but you only take it once every 7 years. So the amount of bad is very reduced, and maybe it makes you have a lot of fun that night. So in your case, yeah, but that's why drug consumption is such a difficult problem to regulate, to make sure everything works fine and no one abuses it. So, because it's just a very difficult thing with a lot of variables, a lot of you have to think in a very complex way. You have to not only see your part but also see the other's part, and the others have to do vice versa. See themselves, see yourself. It's very complex to deal with addiction. Because of this dual nature of good and evil, and this dual nature of human processing information, this static, as I call it, this static dynamic nature. And I call this the static dynamic dilemma of good and evil. More on the book. But more or less, this is like the explanation of shit. I'm running out of this. It's wet towels. So we have, right, this is the objective definition of good and evil. The labels we use to label nouns that we perceive collectively and individually, what we perceive as good, as increasing the likelihood of survival and later happiness, and what we perceive as decreasing the likelihood of survival and later happiness. Am I missing something in the definition? That we perceive as survival, happiness, increased good, decreased evil, collectively and individually. And then you got the full, complete objective definition of good and evil, acknowledging all the natures that good and evil can have: collective, individual, static, dynamic, perception. If I'm missing something, the full description, I'm going to read it from the book, so I make sure I'm not missing anything. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, come on. Oh, it's at the beginning of the chapter almost. So good and evil are those things that have seemed to grant this better or worse likelihood of survival and happiness according to an individual or group of people's personalities and their nature around them. With personalities, I meant the subjective desires that drive your movement towards happiness actions, happiness producing actions. Good. So now we understand good and evil. We understand all the things that moves our way of doing it. And why do we do so? Because it's our tool to navigate complex problems that we don't fully understand. It's emotionally driven. We use correct and incorrect when we can logically deduce the outcome. But when we are not that capable of using logic because the problem is too big, we start using good and evil as an excuse. And as we saw with the previous chapter, when a society gets very big, with graph theory and all this stuff, we see that the amount of combinations of alliances and likes and dislikes that everyone can get is just too complex for our limited intelligence. So we start using these adjectives and we start creating this social beliefs, these social norms to guide ourselves, because our brain, by biology, needs some rules in order to process information, and then we create laws. And we create what is more like the cultural part of the good and evil, what is good and what is evil, like social norms, non-written norms, right? Like you don't go in the street naked, even if it might not be illegal, but you don't do it because it's just a social norm. It's part of the dynamic nature of good and evil and our human processing information capabilities. And law is the static part that appears when this society just gets too complex. And let's see. So static dynamic, of course, good and evil is related to the fixed variable resolution technique. I've said this. Static dynamic dilemma of good and evil. And then, well, the cultural thing, right? The average. This is how I define it. Maybe it's not the way that people from the education or the universities define it, but morality is like the average conception of the common good and evil, the common agreement based by culture and tradition and stuff like this. That's morality. And then the process of thinking, analyzing if something was good or evil is called ethics. And morality guides ethics but doesn't determine it. I have an example there, like for example, morality, lying is bad. You don't lie, it's bad. But you lie to protect a friend, then it's good. So even if your moral is telling you that something is bad, in the process of actually deciding if something was bad or good, in the process of ethics, you might label it as good because you're protecting your friend, and protecting a friend according to morality is also good. So morality is just a reference. Then we have, which is a static part, and then we have the dynamic counterpart. Very, very human-like things. That's the way our brain processes information. Now, am I missing something? As we saw, when this gets very complex, we not only create laws, but we also create a state, okay, which depends on your political protocol, right? Your way you organize your politics, democracy, oligarchy, dictatorship. We'll get more into the details of what defines what later. But you create a state, and the state usually is the one who creates the laws. because it has the monopoly of violence, which can create a big alliance, which makes it easier to process the information and just create a fixed reference that we need biologically to just continue adapting to reality and trying to survive and to be happy as living human beings. Now, am I missing something? I feel like I'm missing a detail. Just read the book. Everything is more clear there, maybe. The law and the people. The law is like the static part, and the dynamic part is the people. The people, el pueblo, as we say in Spanish. And I briefly touch upon emotions and instincts. Emotion, which is a kind of instinct, yeah. And then we have rational thinking. Okay, and because it gets complex, we tend to use emotions, but I will explain this later in another class. And now, why do we use good and evil when we are dealing with power, right? Usually, when someone wants to use the power, they have to convince the people or convince people that we are doing it for the good because it's going to improve, not because it's going to be bad. So that's why it's important to understand what variables play into the role of defining something as good, as evil, and why. So, let's link it to power. Let's link it to power now. The way you link this to power is, I just explained it. And sure, if you have a very small amount of people in your society, it's like, okay, this one is wet, nice. If you have a small amount of people, it's very easy to agree, and it's like, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is not good, this is collectively bad, because you don't have to take into account a lot of people's likes and dislikes. But then we grow society, blah blah blah. I'm repeating myself, I know. I'm just trying to explain the connection in the clearest simple example, a metaphor, analogy, whatever I can think of. So when you have a group of people, if you perceive something is good and someone else perceives is good, there is no conflict, which is what drives politics, the quest for power, the resolution of conflicts, because you have opposing interests. But that's stressing. So what's the goal, right? What's the goal of any political system? Well, first, if you're in the politics, which is the fight for power, the goal is to win the fight. Who enters a fight with the goal of losing the fight? No one. But the better goal, in the sense of human nature, is avoiding the fight. That's better. Doesn't mean it's always possible, but that's the ideal goal, right? What you like and what others like, well, it's aligned. And when you have a collective, what the law says also aligns with your perspective. And when everyone aligns, everyone is happy, no one has conflicts, we live a very good life. This is the ideal, which is different from the practice. But if we want to get as closer as possible to the ideal, we have to understand as best as possible reality and be very intelligent. That's why maximize intelligence, optimize for happiness, blah, 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 cheerfulism, blah, blah, blah. Now, of course, if the law says opposite, then there's going to be some conflict. Maybe he agrees, you don't agree, and then you start having politics, the fight for power, because you disagree, and when there's a conflict, when information is like nature thing, forces cannot just be forever against each other. One will win eventually, and the direction will be determined by the larger force. And as we saw in human societies, that depends on your muscle, but also the more you grow, about your information processing capabilities. That's why media is so important, the control of the media, right? This is a very trendy topic nowadays, because then you control how people can think. Doesn't mean you fully control it, but you influence how people think, and the way people think is the way they move, and the way they move and the way they think, it's power. That's why media is so important for power, politicians, blah, blah, blah. Which will determine who has the larger dick, the larger force, and then it's like, boom, I'm right and you're not. Because right and not, good and evil, is subjective and dependent on the context and the desires of the group of people who are defending their individualistic or collective motivations. Maybe I'm talking too fast. maybe. Put the video in 0.75 reproduction speed. So we got that, right? We know now that the goal is, if possible, we should aim for everyone to align the law, my individual ethics, the individual ethics of our neighbor. Well, that's very difficult. Why? Because that depends on survival and happiness is always changing. You know, you get bored of stuff, and then you try new hobbies, you try new things that require different resources, and society, if they don't adapt faster to provide you the resources to be happy, then you have a conflict, and then you create I don't know, in a democracy, you might say, hey, I want to change this law so I can better get resources because this guy is using them for something, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe you don't need to use the law. You can use the free market and the economy and the money to move the resources around in such a way that you actually are happy. It depends. But in reality, sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it goes the market way, but they are actually similar tools to reach this human goal. And that's why it's very important to maximize your intelligence and optimize your happiness so you can better use the tools to create a better productive outcome. And hopefully we can manage sometimes to get this. And as I said, capability is not tendency, but tendency showcases capability. The thing is that just because we can do this doesn't mean we're gonna achieve this. But it doesn't mean either that we will never achieve this. And if we never try, we'll never know. And what's the best try? Cheerfulism. And new technologies and blah, 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 that I will explain later. Oh, fuck. Now. Okay, this is dry. I'll leave it on the floor. Pick it up later. This is not that dry. These are from the previous video. I have so many. I don't want to run out of paper towels. So this is like how happiness connects to biology, which connects to social coordination, which eventually creates the structures that we're used to and we're shown since we're kids, like law, and why laws change, and why information is power, and power is also muscle, and you have to understand your happiness, you have to understand your stuff, you also have to understand the monetary system, how money works. That's why I'm gonna do another set of classes relating to the economy to understand fully, deeply, and intuitively economy, so you can better use the tools and the philosophy of cheerfulism too to create a better world and hopefully an utopia. An utopia where abuse is minimized, maybe not eradicated, maybe it gets eradicated for a few days, but the world is so complex and we are still so stupid that probably the only thing we can do is hope for the minimization of abuse instead of the deletion of abuse. And hopefully that minimization is no physical wars. Maybe economical wars, economical negotiations, blah, 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 but not people literally killing each other as of today. So that's why it's important to understand politics, how politics moves, why it influences you, how it influences you, and what you can do about it. Okay, so there's like different, and then when you have a lot of people and you have to make them agree on something that's good or evil, then you can have different tools like nationalism feelings and stuff like this, but I'm not going to talk about this in the classes. If you want to know my analysis and understanding of nationalism, you can go read the book and how I think nationalist feelings could be improved in a logical way so they don't cause that much trouble. You can also go read the book. You can also think about it for yourself. I hope you do that and you train your brain to thinking and analyzing. Here there is an example that I didn't mention because I thought about other examples. Yeah, I'm not going to mention it. There's another example explaining why good and evil are perception dependent and they can have different collective natures than the individual ones. It's on the book. Go read it if you want. I just created on the fly examples that I think are good and obvious. So I'm not going to repeat this one. And sure, and you can see that politics, the fight for power, will determine on trying to convince more people what is good, what is evil, and that will determine on trying to convince people what is going to improve their survival or improve their happiness, or at least not make it worse. Usually nowadays we actually have this stupid is literally stupid, like not in a despective way, but in a logical way, where you appeal to emotions more than rational sense. And instead of arguing that, hey, this is going to increase our happiness, this is going to make it everyone better, what politicians usually say is like, oh, the other one is very bad, and the happiness is going to go down. Everything is so negative. Just fight for it. You have to fight for not getting worse. Instead of fighting for being better, you have to fight for things not getting worse, and that creates more conflict, and that is I think that's objectively something more stupid, or at least less intelligent. Remember about the first classes about spectrums, and you can say the wording in different things. This is intelligence, and a small amount of intelligence is stupidity. You can say when you go in this direction, you're being more intelligent, or you're being less stupid. And when you go in this direction, you can say you're being less intelligent, and it sounds more friendly. Or you can say you are being more stupid, and it sounds more blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying that these techniques are, as of my reasoning process, more stupid or less intelligent. I will explain this why in another class, but yeah, you have the fixed variable resolution technique. We are assuming, of course, that anarchism is not possible. We will talk more about this later, or if I don't talk about it later, I talk more about it in the book. We are assuming that an ingenious way of thinking. In another class, we will understand better what's the difference between a democracy, an oligarchy, and a dictatorship. We understand that politics is the fight for power. It's not the power dynamics, it's part of power dynamics, but it's the fight for power when there's conflict. Which conflict can be caused because of survival needs, happiness needs, an inefficient management of the resources, blah, blah, blah. And the ideal society is the one where there's no abuse, when everyone agrees that, okay, this is the right thing to do, this is the good direction, let's try it out. Doesn't mean we're going to succeed, because it doesn't mean because you perceive something as good is good. Maybe you're lacking information and you're doing something that is actually bad, like drug addictions, or maybe you want to try experiment, and the experiment gives the opposite results, and everyone is like, oh shit, we thought it was good and I didn't do it with good results. So even if you are all coordinated and happy and everything, you can still make wrong decisions, wrong conclusions. So yeah, that's a thing to take into account. Then I just said the static dynamic nature of all this, how this is biologically aligned with the way our brain processes information. And now I'm gonna finish this class with let's say spicy questions, right, to make you think. And I'm gonna frame them in a negative way, so it's like, oh, what is this guy saying? And it's like, I have to think about it now because it's attacking my beliefs. But I don't attack your beliefs. It's just a psychological technique, so I try to promote your thinking. So I don't really believe what I'm gonna. Well, maybe one of the answers, yes, but okay, let's just throw the questions at you, and you do the thinking. Of course, I'm gonna answer these questions. These questions are answered in the book. So I encourage you to think, right? With all the tools I've given you, the ingenious way of thinking, the happiness, your personality, the nature of power, the nature of good and evil, all these tools, all these reasoning models and frameworks, you should use them to answer these questions, or you should use your own ones and learn thinking. And so we can successfully coordinate in such a way that we are closer to this ideal state that I drew here earlier. Now, here's the thing. For the anarchist people, I'm gonna trigger you now, okay? If biologically our brain needs a fixed information to fix information and make something dynamic, we can conclude maybe by biological principles that the state is necessary, because we need to fix variables, and the combination in large societies is just impossible to process from the point of view of an individual's brain. So we can conclude that because of some biological principles, anarchism is impossible. Is this true? Is this not true? Can you make this not true somehow? Think about it. And of course, people who think anarchism is possible are going to be like, fuck, is there a mistake in my logic procedure? Is there not a mistake? Am I using a concept wrong? Am I using a concept with one definition and you're using it with another definition? Think about it and answer about it. Now I'm gonna trigger, if someone here supports dictatorships and oligarchies, I'm gonna trigger them. Because democracy, okay, I'm gonna say that democracy is the best protocol for power dynamics and for politics. I'm gonna say it's the best, right? It's the best. The dictatorship of the majority, that some people call it. We will define them more properly in the future class, but think about it. If democracy is a system that makes the state move around freely, or as freely as possible, so new faces, new ideas, and new things can go to the static part of, or the fixed part of our existence as a society. And then we have a dynamic part which coordinates this via voting, free voting, freedom of speech, whatever. This is the most efficient flow of information. And because it's the most efficient flow of information, is the system that will allow us to adapt better. Because good ideas can flow easily and bad ideas can flow also easily. But if you detect the bad idea doing an experiment, you can also make it change as very quick, because you have this dance between state and the people, coordinating the static nature of our ethics and the dynamic nature of our ethics that resides on the people, on the culture, and all this stuff. So that's why democracy is the most efficient method, and it's very biologically aligned with our brains, with what our brains do, because we fix information, and the most, say the smartest, the most intelligent of us, they are like, oh yes, these scientists, people who are very smart and create very useful things. So if the science have this methodology of fixing a dynamic, doing experiments, taking conclusions, making something dynamic if it was wrong, using it again if it was true, and doing this as fast as possible so we have science and useful stuff. If democracy is the political protocol that does this faster, then it must give better results. And thus, it's the best protocol ever. Is this true? Is this false? Think about it. It's not true. I'm going to make you a spoiler. And this is not necessarily true, I think, too. What was I don't remember exactly what was the argumentation. I explained the argumentation. I think just our technology is not advanced enough, but I can envision a future with certain technological functionings that make anarchism possible. But that future is far from. I'm giving you the answers that I think I came to conclude. And I said I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm going to give them in a future video. Now think about it. Is democracy the best protocol because of these reasons? Is anarchism impossible because of these reasons? And everything is kind of tied to our human biology. So how can you deny that, right? It's science. It's impossible to deny. You can't. I mean, that's not true. As we saw, science is about denying all the time and creating new truths that are useful and adapt with time. But to some extent, everything needs a definition. And what you define, you're creating a fixed thing. You are believing. So is science a religion, a very efficient and adaptive one? That's another question for you to answer. I'm not going to give you the answer. Think, use your brain, connect concepts, learn concepts, define them, experience life, improve your adaptability, so you can be maximizing your intelligence, and then you can optimize your happiness. And by extension, because you're a social animal, you will also eventually maximize. I will get deeper into why this, the happiness of the people around you. Good. So these are the two questions, right? And I've explained how everything connects, how survival and happiness connect to ethics, to decision taking, to complex societies, to simple societies, two people societies, three people societies, lots of people society. I've explained the principle of chaos that can get over your intelligence. I've also explained that. But well, this is like there is another way of explaining this, that I have this and I have here, and it's actually cool, which is like destruction is easier than construction. Let me see if this is recording. It's recording. Destruction is easier than construction, and that's just something we see. What is easier? To build a castle sand in the beach, or to destroy it? To destroy it. 99.9% of the times, destruction is easier than construction. Intelligence is decreasing entropy, creating order. That's energy expensive, and that's difficult. Whereas destroying is easy. We are just saying the same things but with different words, which is the thing we observe, which is destruction is easier than construction. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the tendency. And as human beings, as living beings, we have the capability to construct more than we destroy. But as we saw, capability does not assure tendency. And we must put effort and study every now and then, put effort into maximizing our intelligence so we can better communicate, so we can better process information and solve problems. The problem, for example, of the power dynamics and of politics. What political protocol do we need now? Do we need anarchism? Do we need democracy? Do we need a dictatorship? Do we need an oligarchy? If you want to understand and properly answer these questions to your nation and to your personality, well, you must understand how it works. And this is what I intuitively understand what it works and build the knowledge and then share it with people, debate with people, and well, successfully coordinate transmitting information. That's what humans do. This is okay. I'm gonna put the last question, and I think that's all for this second class. Yeah, let's put one last question so you think about it. Let me think about framing it. So if we are animals that process information in a sort of one-dimensional way, let me elaborate. Because we are like either fixing something or making it dynamic, right? If we have this, well, either one or either zero, either it's static or either it's what dynamic, either is something or is the other, right? If we have this seemingly intrinsic nature of one-dimensional analysis on the information that comes from reality, which in political discussions, when they get too complex and people don't understand it, they use other two labels, which are usually called left and right, left wing, right wing. Is this unavoidable? Is the simplification of truth through left and right unavoidable for human nature because we seem to have this static dynamic? I'm not saying left is static, I'm just writing it, or that right is dynamic. I'm just writing it down. Are we saying that because we have this one-dimensional, zero or one way of our brain processing information, does it mean that we are doomed for all the future generations to be trapped in the simplification of reality, which, as we have seen, if you buy all the solutions that the left proposes, some things might go good, but other things go wrong. And when you buy all the solutions that the right proposes, some things go good and some things go wrong. So are we doomed to always work this way because of our biological principles? That's a question that I answer in the book. And this is a question that, to answer it properly, it's going to take a bunch more of classes. Hopefully, I don't think we are doomed to this. Okay, but think about it. With this, I will stop the class. And I think I'll go buy some of these because I'm running out of them. And let's see when I record the next class. Let's see, I don't know, because now I'm a bit busy these days with work and everything. But yeah, I hope you understood power dynamics better, you understand politics better. And the next class, of course, is gonna be about, this is already done. This thing is part 1, which is the previous video, that's good. I still have 2 more things. Cool to explain. Which I don't know if they're gonna be 2 more classes, 1 more class, but yeah, in the next class we're gonna be discussing politics dynamics, how people fight for power. We were understanding the dynamics of the power of one piece of one person, 2 people, 3 people, power moving around and why it moves around and blah blah blah. And now we're gonna understand when power moves in conflicting ways and you create politics, how those dynamics specifically in that case work, and what things you do, politicians do, and people do to influence them in such a way that the force that you want wins. yeah, that's gonna be the next class, and then probably we're gonna be talking about new technology, how new technology can improve this, and how the efficiency of whatever political protocol you have. And we're gonna be talking about how cheerfulism, which I already explained briefly, why cheerfulism is good for optimizing political protocols. And there's an extra class that will come way later, which is the one defining democracy, defining oligarchy, defining dictatorship, and analyzing them deeply. But in order to analyze them properly, I need you to show you more concepts. So your brain doesn't get used to the classic left-right analysis, and I'm going to unlock you a new way of thinking, and instead of having a one-dimensional analysis, you will have two-dimensional analysis. So only going to be left and right. And with that, you can actually understand democracy and other political protocols better. But to explain all this, it's going to take a while, because when you analyze economical protocols, this new shape of analysis is very intuitive. So I'm going to explain it after that. So now, after all these classes, there's going to come like an economical class, economic dynamics. I call it resource distribution, because that's what economics is: distributing resources, arranging them. And then after explaining that, I will explain the two-dimensional analysis, and then we are going to come back to power dynamics, and we're going to define different power dynamics protocols that we use in societies to organize them. Yeah, that's the video for today, and I'll come back hopefully soon. Bada bing, bada boom.